Economic regulation is one of the most important things that we haven't done in the South African context, at least to my knowledge. First of all, one of the dynamics that lead to the higher importance of this theoretical view around economic regulation is actually the advent of transparency. So what happens, well, according to some of the literature, what happens is that some economies go through a period in which there's a lot of rent-seeking behavior, i.e. corruption. There's a lot of market inefficiencies and failures. And these failures, inefficiencies, and cracks become readily exposed at scale. Once they're exposed at scale, the country or that economy goes through, or that market goes through a period in which their developments become exposed. So what we're going through right now, these zonal commissions of inquiry, access to information about who's funding political parties, which is going to eventually roll down to pressure groups and unions. And then it leads into the corporate sector, so private sector transparency on what is happening, any dirty or clean dealings that have been taking place over the years, and so on. The phase after that is when efficient markets are designed. And that's a completely new environment in which a lot of the practitioners, or a lot of us practitioners or researchers, have in many ways not been involved in. So we've been operating in very asymmetric markets, so markets in which you have limited information, skewed information, biased information, incomplete or fragmented information that is never necessarily placed within its broad, dynamic, and contradictory contexts. Very positivistic information, so information that basically stick to the positive result, particularly in the research sector, research environment. So when you look at the situation that's taking place with your state-owned enterprises, when you look at what's happening with, you could say, South African Airways, what's happening at Protea, what's happening in Transnet, in the transport sector, which is where I am, the first thing that we should really pay attention to is the importance of this information and access to this information, its distribution and dissemination and importance. The second element is that now we're in a much more informed position in terms of understanding how things actually work, why they work the way that they do, and what are the areas of intervention that we need to interact with. This is extremely important because if we get this right, then we will for the first time be in a position where we're chartering a completely new mandate for many of our state-owned enterprises, especially those in the transport sector. It is also a time in which the culture of monopolies in high capital transportation sectors, public monopolies in particular, may start to dissolve. This trend is happening. You look at Transnet, or at least our rail policy, it argues that we are in a position where we need to separate operations from infrastructure, and I think the same thing needs to happen across the board so that more participants have broader access to the market, and the barriers to entry are reduced in certain sectors, certain segments of these enterprises. And this is very feasible. You look at South African Airways, it's not just an airline, it's got various what you'd call subsidiaries in some respect, which are focused on more on the vertical end and sort of partly horizontal end of their service, of their market propositions. So what's important is that if we think about the airline as just an airline, that's great, but there's so many other sectors that are significantly more of an opportunity for other players to enter. The same thing applies with PRASA. In principle, it is in a position in which it requires something similar in terms of unbundling, opening it up to other markets, other players, and the same thing applies also to other SOEs. And we're at that point right now where economic regulation is going to be an essential element behind institutional reform, organizational change, and a shift in investment strategies. And this is coming directly from some of the principles, at least, of economic regulation, which I've only just started getting into. But they provide a deep and important insight about regulatory reform and what the country actually needs and what our towns and people need in general. So that's my 2 cents on the subject. And I think, for today's blog, that's really what I'm focused on. The importance of economic regulation, why it needs to be there, and what causes its necessity. And the other thing again is the role of something like a competition commission in the process, but that's a conversation for another day. But basically, the market inquiries have added significant value to that process as well, and they are an asset. Thank you for tuning in. You could like, subscribe if you're keen on more.